Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this experimental discussion about the end of life and what richness there is in it when we face those issues rather than running from it. So we hope tonight will be a really rich, dynamic discussion, and there will be time at the end for questions and answers. We ask that you hold your questions until then, because then we can all benefit from your question as well as your answer. So that would be great. I'm Mahoney, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. And I'm just really pleased to be here with this group of people and with this group of people. So I thought before I introduce the panel, I'd like to just take a moment and have us spend a few moments in silence just to sort of gather ourselves here and arrive. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, keep them open. And I just invite you to stand up, sit up straight, with your spine straight, but not rigid. And just notice where your body is. Notice how you're seated. Be grateful for the cushions and the pews. That would be a good thing. And just take a moment to sort of check in with your body. And then begin to notice your breath. And just notice that as you're breathing in, you're breathing in. And as you're breathing out, you're breathing out. And know that for the next little while, you have nowhere to go, nothing to do, but just be present here. Be aware of the people around you, the energy in the room. And then when you're ready, just open your eyes and come back into the space. So, next I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I've known all of them. I have long-term intimate relationships with each of them in some way. So I'll first introduce Rich Hayes, and he's conspicuous by gender, I think. But he is a hospice chaplain and a graduate of One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York City. And he began his hospice career in 1997, serving as a volunteer at hospice, and then once ordained became a chaplain at hospice care in the Berkshires. That's where I originally met him. He's also a musician, an author, a member of the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and Spiritual Directors International. And additionally, he has a very rich background in business and management, and has also served as a client advocate in emergency services at the Berkshire Community Action Council. And Jane sent me her bio, and it's the smallest type, but it's the meatiest bio. So Jane is a social worker who for the past 15 years, had served as a medical social worker and bereavement counselor with hospice care in the Berkshires. She also has done consulting with the Gala Equine Assisted Psychotherapy Program. But before that, she had a very active private practice working with individuals, couples, families, and groups for over 40 years. She's a graduate of Smith College School for Social Work, and she offered trauma-informed, strength-based psychodynamic psychotherapy, family support to at-risk kids and their family, and also worked with internal family systems therapy. So she's got quite a resume and tons of wonderful experience. And Barbara Becker is the author of Heartwood, in case you haven't seen it. The Art of Living with the End in Mind. And Barbara was so moved by her experience of loss of her own and those of patients with whom she worked that she made a midlife pivot into becoming an interfaith minister, and really began to explore how we find the importance in the meaning of death. Through a spiritual lens, Becker explored different chapters of loss throughout her life, unearthing the love and strength present at the center of each experience. Just as with the heartwood of a tree, the central core that is no longer alive, yet supports the newer growth rings, the dead become a source of enduring strength to the living. Barbara is also the founder of Equal Shot, a strategic communications consultancy specializing in strengthening the voice of the nonprofit community. For over 25 years, she served a broad range of institutions, including the United Nations, Human Rights First, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the Grameen Bank of Bangladesh. And she's also taught on the faculty of Columbia University's Master's Program in Strategic Communications and is a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. She holds a Master of Arts in International Administration from the School of International Training, a Master of Arts in Media Studies from the New School, and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Anthropology from Haverford College. And she lives in New York City with her husband and 2 sons. So, and mine is written in the third person, but I'll speak of myself. I also am an ordained interfaith interspiritual minister. I'm a graduate of One Spirit Seminary, and I'm an ordained member of Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing and Engaged Buddhism. And I'm also an initiate of the Sufi order in Ayatia. I'm an certified expressive arts therapist and mindfulness meditation teacher. So my Sufi name is Walia, which when you're initiated in some of these orders, they give you a name. And that name, it's taken me quite a while to grow into it. It means friend of God or God's friend. And when I first received it, I sort of thought, oh, big deal. I'm a slow learner. So it means so much more to me today than when I first received it. So, and that's really how I try to work with people in my practice. So anyway, I'm thrilled to be here with Barbara and with everybody this evening because the work I've been pursuing lately has been around this concept of viriditas. Viriditas is a word that's a Latin derivative that was coined by Hildegard von Bingen in the 11th century. And she was this extraordinary woman. She was a Renaissance woman before the Renaissance. I mean, she was just brilliant. She was an author, a poet, a mystic, a writer, a doctor, an attorney. She bossed the popes around, which was no small feat in the days of the knights and noblemen, you know. So anyway, she was pretty authoritative and brilliant. And she came up with this concept of viriditas, which really refers to sort of the greening of the earth and the greening of the planet, and also the greening of ourselves. And so I kind of adopted it to the greening of our souls. And Barbara's work, I love metaphor anyway, and viriditas is sort of a metaphor for the greening of our souls. And doing that work, part of that work is really addressing our grief and our loss. Your soul can't be very green, you can't be very alive and living in the present if you're pushing your grief away, pushing your sadness away, and your loss. And of course, we all know our culture encourages us to do that. You know, we get told that we have 3 days to grieve the loss of somebody, and then that's it. And anybody who's lost anyone or anything knows that it's not over in 3 days. So anyway, it's a very important part of my practice to help people move through those things. And then I bumped into Barbara's book. So, and then the metaphor of heartwood to me was so rich. So I think without further ado, I'd like to turn to you, Barbara, and ask you to amplify on the concept of heartwood and how you happened to write this book.
Thank you so much, Eileen. There are no rules for these conversations except for one, which is that there is no hierarchy of grief. Now, I truly believe that you might have lost somebody who had lived a long and full life. You might be mourning a miscarriage. You might have lost a job or a home. But to me, all of that matters. If it's important to you, it's important to us. And I feel like we gaslight ourselves when we say, oh, my loss was a long time ago, or it wasn't that big. So I just want to honor all of the losses that are in the room tonight. And I also want to just say what amazing synergy to be here at this particular time of year. You know, we are at a season in which cultures around the world acknowledge the thin space between the land of the living and the land of the dead. Now, we know Halloween, of course, but we have Dia de los Muertos, from Mexican diaspora and other cultures, where we take some aspects of the Aztec and Toltec traditions and we kind of combine them with Christian traditions and bring the dead back into the space where we can honor them again. In Asia, in Cambodia, right, just recently was a holiday called Ancestors Day, which is really 15 full days of honoring people who have died. And out in rural areas, people will take rice balls and throw them up in the air to offer them to the hungry ghosts. You know, in Scotland and the Gaelic countries, people are celebrating Samhain. And Samhain has a modern day expression in a holiday called To Absent Friends. So they're bringing in this idea that there shouldn't be taboo in talking about our loved ones. I love that. I really do. And thinking about that, I wonder if we could try a little experiment in this room in which we bring in the people who we might have lost by just popcorning out their names for a minute. You can close your eyes if you want and listen to all of the names, or just absorb it.
Annette. Eileen. Marty. George. Julius. Lisa. Norma. Carolyn.
Norman.
Right.
Thank you for that. I feel like our space here just expanded from 30 or 40 to 300, 400. We welcome all these beings into our space. Yeah. So Eileen asked me to talk about Heartwood, and she's so amazing, she actually brought the sample of Heartwood. This is just mind-blowing to me. I'm so moved that she did this. Can you all see this? Or should I attempt to pick it up? It's about 50 pounds. So this is the heartwood of a tree. You'll see this darker inner core around which the saplings grow. And heartwood is surprising because it's inert. It's completely dead. It's the part of the tree that is prized by woodworkers for its enduring strength, and yet it doesn't participate any longer in the flow of water and nutrients up and down the tree. But the tree would collapse and the growth wings wouldn't be able to grow if the heartwood weren't there. I was looking for some kind of metaphor after my parents died. They died a couple of months apart from one another. And I'm very moved by the cathedrals of nature, and I went out into the woods and really started thinking about how we are meaning-making beings, truly. And in terms of nature, we find the ebb and flow of the tides, you know, the waxing and waning of the moon, the seasons and the changes of the seasons. Henry David Thoreau said of the leaves that we're seeing right now, the autumn leaves, they teach us how to die. So when I learned about Heartwood, I was so excited because it was a way of talking about loss and about love at the same time. We are so much like the trees ourselves. Those we have lost form our hardwoods, and we get to continue to honor them. So, do you want me to talk about how I came to write this book? There's so many stories in this book, but the one in which I really began to process loss through writing was the story of my friend Marissa. Marissa was my earliest childhood friend, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And when the doctors told her that she had 1 year left to live, she went out and she lived life to the fullest. While I shriveled up in the fetal position with severe anxiety, thinking about her and her family and her new husband, and then extrapolating to every future loss I was going to have, my parents, other people around me. And I could not concentrate or be present to life anymore. I was just a knot of anxiety. So I started doing a bunch of research, and I learned that sages and saints throughout time and place, from the Buddha to the Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, to wisdom keepers of the Judeo-Christian traditions, they have all advised us to live with the end in mind, to actually turn death into a practice. So a friend sat me down in front of the computer and said, "You are going to blog about this. You have 365 days to live, and you just sit there and kind of create reflections about what's going on." And I started writing this blog called A Year to Live, and it was transformational for me. I watched what Marissa was doing. I learned from her, from the deep time she spent with family and friends. And I began to notice that you don't have to go off and do big bucket list things. That life is really lived in the quotidian, in the day-to-day things, like sitting on the floor, which in my apartment was strewn with Legos, and meditating there rather than in some pristine hall somewhere on a beautiful meditation cushion. That's where I started noticing the value of presence in our lives. So, life is so beautiful and so unpredictable. And in so many ways, it's beautiful because it's unpredictable. We all have a Marissa in our lives, like my childhood friend. And we can learn so much from them if we're given the opportunity to actually take a risk and step towards death rather than run away from it. So I thought we could kind of play with that a little bit. I would really love to hear, we could maybe start with you, Rich. I really would like to know about the families that you've worked with and what helps them go in the direction of death and fear rather than kind of running away and closing down.
Thanks, Barbara. That's not an easy question to answer. Every situation is different. Every person is different. But I'm reminded of a patient I met a number of years ago, and she was in her late 40s, and she had been diagnosed with lung cancer. She had never smoked. She was very health conscious. She taught yoga. She was a vegetarian. And when I met her, she was really, really pissed off. And, the whole idea of what she was handed, she just had a lot of anger. Now, she was a lovely person, and she welcomed me in, and she'd actually moved back to her parents' house, in her final months. And so we would spend time in her room, and we would talk. And as I got to know her a little bit better, what seemed to me was that she was really resisting what she was having to say goodbye to. And so one day, I talked to her about all the things that aren't going to be. One of the things that she had shared with me was that she thought she had found the right relationship, but she hadn't yet, and that really, really, really filled her with just such sadness, because that was never going to happen, that right relationship she had always hoped for. And so this particular day, I talked about the grief that was underneath the anger. There's a saying, I don't think Hospice cornered the market on this, but oftentimes the anger is really unexpressed grief. And so on this particular day, I'm talking with her, and I said, stop where you are right now and feel what's happening to what you're saying goodbye to. And she said, I don't think I can do that. So I used the analogy. I said, have you ever been at the beach swimming? And there's a big wave coming, and you can't outrun that wave. I said, what do you do? And she said, well, you turn your face into the wave and you dive into it. I said, same thing with grief. The thing is that as human beings, the allowance of grief is terrifying, because it's more powerful than we are, and that's how we perceive it. So we feel powerless in the face of it. But I think the wave is really a great analogy. That wave will pass over. That grief will pass through. And there's something on the other side of that grief. And so with this particular person, over the next several weeks, she dove into this grief. And it's a good many years ago now, since I've seen her, and I still think of her often for the work that she did, the remarkable work that she did. And when I had first met her, she was really walling herself off from people. She was really isolating herself. But she didn't understand why. And when she did this work, after that, there was a real shift in her, a remarkable shift. And I would go over to her house, and literally I would describe the room that we sat in. It felt like a shrine, in all the best sense. There would be sunlight in the room. There was a lot of things from her life there that she had made. And she was so present. It's hard to describe, but I think if you've ever had the experience of being with someone that is absolutely present right in that moment with you, that's what she had. And on my last visit with her, and I would say there was no indication that she was what we would call transitioning to actively dying. She was progressing in her journey towards the end, but I had no idea that it would be my last visit with her. And on this particular day, she walked me out to the door. And she did something she never did before. She put her arms around me and she gave me a hug. And she thanked me. And I was a little bit surprised. And then she said, I have to give you something. She gave me a book. The book was called The Wisdom of Frogs. Anyway, so I left that visit. It was a Thursday. And at that time I was off on Fridays. But I left that visit and I got into the car and I noticed, I wondered why she did that. And I got a call the next morning that she died. And, I was early at that time in my hospice chaplaincy, but I learned a very valuable lesson from her. That on some level she knew, she understood. And after she had died, I spoke to her family. And they were able to report to me how she died. And the peacefulness, the absolute just letting go and leaving. And to me, I just never forgot that, the value in, actually not running from that grief. One of the things that saddens me is the reluctance in our culture to talk about death. We call it something else. I gotta be honest with you, I have bone to pick this, passing, they pass. Well, pass what? You pass the snow, you pass, there's other things I can pass too. Why not call it what it is? So that's just me, all right? That's just me. But I think that also, when we do that, we do not respect or honor what this process is. And I'm going to suggest to you, we don't really even know what life is. Do we? Can we explain what life is? How it happens? If we don't know life, how do we know what death is? We spend a lot of energy, trying to outrun something you can't outrun. I will just say this, that some of the greatest teachers I've met are some of the people I've met as hospice patients. And I did not set out to become a hospice chaplain. I became a volunteer a long time ago, only because I had a friend that was helped by hospice, and after he died, and he was only in his early 40s, after he died, I wanted to do something to pay them back. That was the, and you got to watch out when you volunteer. You never know where it's going to take you. You never know where it's going to take you. But anyway, I don't know what else to say here. Yeah, that's enough. Enough for me. I'll pass it back over.
I feel like I'm going to just walk outside and see frogs everywhere. Because that's the way these things work sometimes.
It is.
Yeah. Jane, I would love to hear about your experience getting involved in this world. But I'm also really, since you're a psychotherapist, I get to ask you all these questions.
Psychotherapists never answer questions.
I am so fascinated by this term toxic positivity. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this is what we do all the time in our culture. We come up with silver linings and we kind of talk ourselves out of bad situations. And I've been hearing a lot from the world of social psychology about psychological richness, which is more about using our curiosity to go deeply into both. I love how the Taoists express this. They say that this is a world of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And we, if we go only in direction of joy, which is our culture and our advertising and everything around us, we're missing out on the richness of life. We all know about PTSD, but I think a lot of people haven't even heard that there's something called post-traumatic growth. And I would love for you to just talk about your experience around these ideas.
Thank you. It's a privilege. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming and being willing to give your evening to talk about this. So this is a hugely important topic, and I've been thinking as I've been listening to what you all have said so far, particularly the pushing away of grief. At hospice, I do, and I'll get to your question eventually. I'm not going to pull the psychotherapist thing on you. But at hospice, as a social worker, we do a lot of what we call informational meetings, which is when people are thinking of coming on to hospice, or even if they just want information about what hospice is and how the admission process works, when are we ready, etc. And a lot of times when people receive a diagnosis and a prognosis that there can be nothing else that's going to be effective at curing whatever disease they have, then they'll seek these informational meetings. And a lot of times what families will may come with or without the person who's actually headed towards death, the families will say, well, we don't want so-and-so to know that they're going to be on hospice. We generally will say, well, we won't lead with that necessarily, but if we are asked by your mom, your father, well, then we won't lie to her. But she's so scared to die. She's terrified. And I see so often that people push away the notion of confronting death because they're protecting each other. Because they think that so-and-so is going to be devastated by the notion that they are approaching the end of their life. When actually it's the protector who is feeling devastated and projecting that onto the other person. And then you talk to the other person, you talk to, mom who's lying in a hospital bed, and mom is saying, I'm dying, aren't I? And I'm saying, well, it may seem to be that case. What do you think is happening? Well, yeah, I know I'm dying, but don't tell my children. It happens a lot. And part of the work of social work is to say, well, bring these two sides of anticipatory grief together, because we start to grieve a long time before we actually lose people sometimes if we can see it coming. Just help people to have the language to talk to each other about what they're going through together. Regarding sometimes death really can be traumatic. But it doesn't need to be necessarily. Most of the time, I dare say, sudden death can be tremendously traumatic. But when a person comes onto hospice, for example, usually you have a little bit of time to kind of process what's going on. And I've found in my professional life and in my personal life too, just full disclosure, I have one parent who died a very long death after having suffered stroke. He lived on for 8 years. And eventually died of complications of that. And my mom, on the other hand, took her own life, so there was absolutely no warning about that one. So I've seen them from both sides of the spectrum. But what I have seen time and time again is that, number one, if we can find the language, if we can find the courage within ourselves or the support to look at what's coming and to dare to speak of it, first to ourselves in our own internal conversation, and then to other people who are in a position to support us, then we can go through it together. And grief shared, just like joy shared, is so it's so much easier.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to add to that to me, one of the gifts, certainly one of the many gifts I've been given through the years working with hospice, is the realization of my own mortality. I can't tell you exactly when it happened, maybe when I turned 50 or 55 or whatever. All of a sudden I realized when I went to bed, there's no guarantee that I'm opening my eyes the next morning. Now, that might terrify you. I'm not going to say it didn't get my attention. But what started to happen, and this is again just a gift to me, is I started opening my eyes more. When I woke up in the morning, my first response when I took a breath was, thank you, I'm here. I got another day. And the remarkable thing happened also is that some of the priorities in my life started to shift. And that's one of the gifts, And we're always dying to what we've been to become the next thing we're becoming anyway. I mean, I'm not the guy I was when I was 20, and that's a good thing, It's very good that you didn't know me then. So that's to me, again, one of the gifts that can also come from facing, the grief that, I know that I'm not going to always be here, and there's things already. One of the things I'm learning as I get older, is I'm already saying goodbye to things. I mean, I can't do some of the things I always took for granted that I could do. And there's sadness with that, But I'd much rather be sad than to be angry. It works a little better for me. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Just to add to that, you made me think of both and as opposed to either or. And one of the things I've learned is I can be sad and happy at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And for the longest time, I spent so much time trying to figure out what was wrong with me because I was sad and that was wrong, or I was happy and shouldn't be, or whatever. But that whole idea of being able to hold the both is so important because I don't know many people who only have one feeling at a time anyway. So it was sort of a myth, Oh, and just one other thing. There was a wonderful director of hospice care when I was there, Clara Pace, who used to say to patients and their families that she said, I can't take this away and I can't do it for you, but I can walk with you. And that's what the hospice experience offers people. And that's what we can do for each other and also ourselves. I can walk with me. But if I'm totally pushing my feelings away, I'm not anywhere near this green heart.
What's the right, Gus? Oh, we're all just walking each other home.
Okay, so anyway, when my mom died, which was absolutely totally unexpected, nobody really had any clue that she was going to do what she did. Of course I was shocked, and of course I was devastated, and of course it left me with millions of questions, and I had to keep living. So there's the thing that we do sometimes with difficult things. We compartmentalize, we kind of put them over to the side, and maybe we'll have a few extra cocktails if this is our inclination. That road leads nowhere good, at least for me. But in any event, so you kind of get through. But what I've found over time is that in talking with other people about the experience and talking about about what I've learned over time is number one, that you can get through the absolute worst thing that could ever happen to a person. If you survive a trauma, you probably will have scars, and it will mean something to you. But what that means is very much open to examination, to working with it, as long as you can kind of keep some kind of relationship with it. So I think when I talk with people about what terrifies them about death, and people come to hospice and they are terrified and they're shocked and they are reeling from the news. Sometimes, especially with young people who come as patients who are quite young, we treat people who are from age infants, toddlers, all the way up through geriatrics. People who are really in the full bloom of life, young parents with children, people who are newly married, people who never got around to getting married, but always thought they would do it someday, and now, one of them is dying. When I ask them, what are you afraid of? Most of the time sometimes it's what happens after death, but a lot of times it's what happens in the run-up. Right. And, number one, how am I going to talk to my family about this? Number two, how am I going to clean up whatever mess in my life I'm going to leave, which I will say, do your advance directives, take care of the paperwork, make out your will. That's my social work part talking. Thank you very much, and go ahead.
Listen to her.
But also, much of the time, it's about, I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to suffer. And then, so what I do as a social worker is to just help people expand on what does suffering mean to you. What's the worst possible scenario that you really don't want to think about? Let's just, take a minute and think about it. We don't have to talk about it forever, but let's just dip a toe into that. And once you dip one toe in, you find, that toe didn't fall off. Maybe you can do 2 toes in the next time. But it's really important to confront that fear. And I oftentimes, when I'm with clients in therapy, as well as at hospice, Rich can tell you that I'm an avid do-it-yourselfer. I do carpentry at home a lot. And so the analogy that I use is about termites. You know, if you got termites in your house and you don't know about it, they can just completely chew up your house. They can wreck your foundation. Your house could be really, really compromised. It could fall down around you. If you know about them, you can address it. But if you don't know about it, if you're not willing to look at what's there, what's below the surface, chances are you are courting a disaster that you really don't need to. Find those termites, bring it out into the light. It's been very, very helpful. So I hope that answers your question too.
You're reminding me of, after college I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and I saw the most beautiful art form there in which people would take like very valuable ancient pottery that cracked, and instead of gluing it together and trying to make those lines disappear, they would take gold dust, sprinkle it into bonding, and put it into the cracks to emphasize the imperfections and the hardships. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying that, in those broken places, we can find our wholeness if we have the right support, and the encouragement of one another, possibly a spiritual tradition, possibly time in nature, wherever it comes from for you, it's a place to kind of lean into. How are we doing on time here? Yeah?
Yeah.
We're both champions.
You first. What happens? Just going along with what you were just saying. I think of this sometimes. I mean, if you knew there was a storm coming, a hurricane or whatever, and you had advance warning, you would prepare for that. You would take care of things. There's a hurricane coming. There is going to come a time in your life, and the sooner you realize that, the more you can prepare for it. And, that can be done in a lot of different ways. I'm a great believer in spiritual practice. And that's not synonymous with religion. I always really emphasize that. But that you have something that can center you in some way. That's important. And of course, the advanced directives and all those other things really do come in handy because, when it hits the fan in your life and all of a sudden, things start to fall apart, you're not going to be able to think in the ways that you want to think sometimes.
For those who might not know what advanced directives are, could you just define those?
I'll let you do that. That's the social worker job. They don't ask me that. I could tell you, but I'm not going to. She'll tell you better. You'll understand.
He could tell me that he's not going to. Okay. Advanced directives are such things as choosing a healthcare proxy, a person who is going to be designated by you to speak for you in the event that you're too sick to speak for yourself or make your own decisions. Also, you could think about making a will. There are durable powers of attorney that are important.
Wishes to write down.
That's a certain kind of advanced directive where you not only choose a healthcare proxy, but you also get a chance to kind of expand on what pain medication I will or will not want, the kinds of environment that I want to be in, how I want people to treat me if I'm seriously ill and headed towards death. Who I want around me, how I want to be remembered, etc. I think those are the 5 questions. Yeah. But anyway, that's available online, and you can also make a will online if you're so inclined. But if you have at all a complicated situation, I encourage you to seek out a competent attorney, of which there are many around here. So anyway, and I think that really helps to alleviate people's anxiety. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world to do necessarily, but once it's done, it is such a relief. It is such a relief. And then you've done that, we have many patients, especially some of the old school folks who, buy and pay for, their funerals, when they're like 35 years old, and sometimes circumstances change and it's kind of odd, but by and large, people who are able to plan a little bit sometimes do better at the very end, because at least they don't have to think about in the 11th hour when they're really compromised. They don't have to think about, oh my God, I didn't do this, now what am I going to do? Another word about healthcare proxy people, and that is not necessarily the person who's closest to you. You might think that, well, if he and I are married, by the way, so that's why I know so much about this. That's why I can give him such a hard time up here. But it might not necessarily be him. It's sometimes people who are very, very close can't speak cogently about another person's wishes, rather than someone who might have a little bit more of a distance emotionally for you. So there's a lot to consider. It's good to consider it ahead of time. So that's that. I had another thought too, a completely different topic. Sometimes, I don't know, there may be certain type A personalities in the audience who really want to do things the right way and who really want to do it perfectly. And I'd like to submit that there's really no wrong way to do this. You might read books about, recommended things to do to prepare for death, but basically, one of the things that really is important about being human is that we're hardwired to make attachments. And then thinking about death and thinking about not living anymore and saying goodbye to all that you've built and held dear through all your life, you're thinking about severing the attachments that you've been wired to build. And that is not easy. That is not easy. But it's really essential to be the way that you can do it, not easily, but it makes it possible to do it in stages. If you are able to give yourself enough time to really kind of go into the fear, the sorrow, the unpleasant emotions. But I just wanted to put out there that it's okay if it's hard. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong if you're struggling. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong if you are feeling unequal to the task at uncertain times. But it's really important that you just kind of hold the possibility that if you can't deal with it today, you might be able to deal with it a little better tomorrow, or you might be able to find someone tomorrow who can kind of hold your hand through this. So that's.
Thank you. You reminded me of, I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to possibly thinking about caretakers or people who are suffering in some other way and not necessarily facing their own mortality immediately, but might have lost a job, might have lost whatever. There are a million little deaths that we all experience, and I think it's important to kind of look at that. And for me, one of the things that really is effective in working with that is the arts. And I'm an expressive arts therapist. I cannot draw to save myself. But I am not afraid to pick up crayons and play with them. And it makes a huge difference. I mean, it's just one example of a way to address it, or writing is another wonderful way to sort of work with some of that suffering. Talking to a friend, going to see a movie, finding movies you relate to. I mean, there are a million different little ways that we can sort of connect with those and acknowledge them in some way. But I'd love to hear what you guys have up your sleeves for that.
I love that. There's a movement right now called death acceptance, and there are all kinds of creative things going on around the world, like death over dinner, where you gather people together and have a conversation over a meal, or death cafes. Yeah, we just did that right before we came here. And we couldn't stop talking about it because it's enlivening. But death cafes are now held in over 80 countries around the world, and people get together, and it's because it came from England, they have tea and cake, and anything about death is on the table. And strangers will sit together and say what they're afraid of or what they're going through, or do you think there's life after death? I've been wondering about this, and just put anything out there. So the creativity of conversation, especially around food, I think is one thing that I really love in this world.
Sure. Yeah, I'll always say something. Sure. You know, that came from England, just like the hospice movement actually did too. So, you know, they seem to be thinking probably more about these things than we do sometimes. You know, the arts, any of the arts, as far as I'm concerned, really, they, you know, the part of the brain that we have that is logical and rational, linear, is a fabulous tool. It really is. We've been able to do an awful lot as human beings, but there's other parts of us, all right, that a lot of times don't get addressed. And I think the arts are one of the places, you know, whether it's painting, whether it's poetry, whether it's music. I'm going to speak as a musician. I got to tell you, that's my happy place. I mean, you know, I've spent a lot of time with a lot of people that have been in difficult situations, and music is just, you know, it's when I can either share it with someone else or even just create something myself. I mean, it's just playing. It's interesting too, you know, as a musician, we always say we play. You know, we play. Now, you know, of course, it took a long time to know how to play the right notes, at least in my case, and sometimes it doesn't always happen, but that sense of play is the key here, you know, and I think that we all knew how to do that once upon a time. That's part of that other side of us. That's not just the linear, rational, logical. It's the deeper part of us, you know, that is called by many different names, and probably is beyond all names, you know. I think the idea of whether it's soul or a true self, that there's something more that we are. And what I do believe, at least what I've witnessed, and I've been with a lot of people as they've left this life, is that there is more to us than we realize. And we need to pay more attention to that part of us. And that's the part that responds, you know. I can't explain. Why does your heart move a certain way when you hear a chord played a certain way or a passage in some music? You might think you're not spiritual, but you're something. Because there's something there that's not logical or linear that's responding. And it's an important thing, I think, to take time. What I've seen is that, and that doesn't always happen when people are approaching death. They don't get all of a sudden enlightened. You know, they're scared or anything else. But I have seen people also step beyond those places where they've been kind of shackled and have an awareness of this. And I've seen something really remarkable happen to those folks, a transformation. And I think that's available for all of us. You know, if we just take the time. Death gets your attention, no two ways about it.
I would just say, on a personal level, so the day that Heartwood came out, I myself was having surgery for breast cancer. So there was no launch party, you know, there was like time in the hospital with ice packs and well, I don't know what. it was intensely painful. I was so lucky that it was caught early, but wow, was it ever a like where the rubber meets the road kind of moment where I got to really test out, like, is this true? Can you live your life more fully by thinking about the end? And I have to say that I came through that and I think, yes, like give it a try because it really works. It's pretty amazing, actually. Who knew? Who knew that I would be reading my own book to find lessons to get through that period of loss in my own life, loss of a health status, because I forever will be either a cancer patient or a cancer survivor. It's changed.
Yeah.
And one of my absolute favorite things during that time, I have a friend who has MS. And I was talking to him about the experience of going through this cancer and like, what if this happens, and, what if I die and my kids haven't graduated, and on and on and on. And he said, Barbara, it really sounds like you're writing chapter 21 of your life when you're only on chapter 4.
Wow.
It was so profound, and that's really the lesson of this book and of all of our experiences. It sounds like, we really do need to live in this present moment, not projecting forward and forward and forward.
Another name for that projection is worry. So I'd invite us all to sort of drop the worry and be more present to where our feet are.
That's Mark Twain, that Mark Twain quote, I've had a good many problems, good many tragedies in my life, most of which never actually happened. And I'm just going to say that I was definitely one of those people that always projected into the future, and the future was never good. And I was missing what was right here, and it's not, I don't want to live that way. And I think, unfortunately, too many people do, because we get trapped into it, because we think we're being responsible. So I'm going to be responsible, imagine everything's going to turn, bad. It doesn't work.
Well, this social worker part is going to rear your little head again and say, that I think there is a difference between planning and worrying.
Yes.
And I think that most of us should maybe take a minute or two at some point to define for ourselves where the line is between planning and worrying, and to strike a good balance between those two ends of the spectrum. Because, even though there's a saying, somebody told me it was a Jewish saying, I don't know, but, man plans, God laughs. And I think to a great extent that's true, but on the other hand, there are certain things that you can do to prepare that are of an operational nature. I think we talk a great deal about the inner work and the spiritual work, and also the social and the family work. I think that in psychotherapy, we have a saying that when you begin treatment, you should begin with the end in mind. That when you're coming into a relationship with a client, a patient, and basically as a therapist, your job is to put yourself out of work, right? Yeah. As your therapist, it is my job to make sure that when you end, you got what you came for, you made the changes that you hope to happen, and that you don't need me anymore. And so I think that that's a good lesson to take forward into preparation for dying. That if you begin life with the end in mind, then number one, it's not scary because you already know what's going to happen. But how are you going to get there? And what are you going to develop in order to help yourself have the best possible time en route?
Right.
So before we turn this over to you, I thought I would read you one little paragraph from the intro to Heartwood, which is, and I have learned that being open to death is a powerful way to learn about living. That when we stop pretending we will live forever, a certain tightness begins to loosen. Slowly, as we give ourselves permission to relax the vice grip we use to try to control our circumstances, a sense of freedom emerges from within. Though little may have changed on the outside, and loss will continue to be our companion, our internal landscape is renewed. Just as we cherish ourselves more, we will cherish others more as well. Sometimes, as the great masters have taught, we have to die before we die if we want to truly live.
There's a wonderful Sufi phrase, die before death, resurrect now. I just Well, thank you. I think we'd love to hear from you folks if you have any questions or comments. We are being filmed by Community TV, and I forgot to thank them and Wendy Germain at the beginning, so I want to do that now. But I just would ask if you have a question, wait until I get to you with the microphone so that at least it will be recorded for sound. So, does anybody have a... Great.
Do you have anything in your book regarding picking up the pieces for the caregiver of a loved one after the death occurs?
After the death.
Yeah. I lost my wife last week. I'm sorry to hear.
I'm really sorry for your loss. Yeah, caregiving is such a deeply complicated, emotional place to be. It's where I was when I took care of my own parents as they were dying. You live with this grief in advance, this anticipatory grief, like knowing that the end is coming, on top of the loss that then happens. And, you know, as long as you caregive and you've been expecting a death, I think some people put an expectation on us that it should shorten the time that we have to grieve after, and it's not at all true. I'm kind of blown away sometimes by, this is now 5 years ago that my parents died, and I can be completely blindsided with emotion in the grocery store especially. I think grocery stores are really dangerous places for people who are grieving. Like every food that they loved, you know, everything that they wanted to eat or didn't want to eat. I mean, the muffins that were discontinued at Trader Joe's that my dad loved. I'm kind of mad about that. But I would say that the biggest piece is to not feel like there's any timeline for grief. To really just go through the cycles, knowing that some days you'll feel better and then it'll go full cycle again and you're right back in it. And that's okay. That's part of the process. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to add something also to that idea that, you know, that the grief doesn't go away, but your life continues and expands around that grief. And so, you know, it's not that the grief is gone, it's just that it is in a different place and your life does go on. And so I heard someone explain it that way, and I thought it really made a lot of sense, you know? It's still here.
I would echo that. You know, there's a transformation that can take place over time, and your timeline is absolutely unique to you and the relationship. I've also noticed when I've talked to people as a bereavement counselor that your relationship to caregiving is also something that's evolving over time. You know, since your loved one has died, you're no longer actively a caregiver, but some people have, there are all different kinds of caregivers. You know, I was not a particularly great caregiver to my father when he was declining. Well, I didn't think I was, but that's another thing. There's the second guessing that goes on, you know, the relationship to my assessment of myself as a caregiver takes a certain amount of time to settle. Caregiving is such a consuming job that sometimes people grieve the caregiving role. You know, what do I do now? You know, there's an emptiness, there's a void. Other people have just a totally different reaction, like a real relief that can bring along the sense of guilt that, you know, thank God I finally have my life back, but what a crappy person I am to feel relieved that I've lost my loved one, and I'm not glad that they've died, but I am glad I don't have to be a caregiver, and anywhere in between, you know. So I think it's important to honor the uniqueness of your relationship in that to that role, and what place is occupied in your life. The saying that I learned in hospice was, you know, that people die, but love doesn't die. You know, the relationship continues, and it evolves and it changes. And you may be talking to your deceased loved ones. You may be, you know, there's.
That's really important.
So it, as Barb pointed out, you know, it's a very complex and very nuanced relationship / job / commitment. You know, some people experience it as a burden and then feel lousy about it, or don't. You know, some people are in caregiving relationships with people who have hurt them. And that brings a whole other set of challenges. So it's a huge spectrum of caregiving, and I'm so glad you asked that question. And I hope we've given you some ideas to carry forward.
I'll say one other thing too, and I'll give it right back to you. That when I heard this actually from another hospice social worker, not you, that when someone dies, the relationship does not end; it just changes.
Yeah, he's still care about it. He's still love
Yeah.
Honestly, I talk to my parents like once a week at least.
They live in.
They do. Somebody in my family was in a tough spot in the hospital this week, and I called on my mom, who's not here in physical form at all anymore. It's just so comforting to me to do that.
Anybody else? No question?
I have an intimacy with this issue because about 10 years ago I needed emergency valve replacement on a rather quick basis. I found thinking about these issues, it's helpful to separate the ideas of dying and what that takes in a carnal, physical sense, and death, being dead, being gone. Separate those two out. A lot of times you can leverage and courage to handle the gritty part when you deal with more existential, spiritual aspects of death, which can teach transcendence, acceptance, and all the virtues. But the other word missing here so far is mystery. We're encountering mystery in the presence, and there's no bad answers. And so, agreeing with what you've been saying, everybody has to be the author of their own grief and their own way through to the other side.
Well said.
Thank you. Anybody on this side of the room? Great.
That's my sister, and yet another sister
Can't hear anything.
died. But my mother was dying, and she brought us all together, and she had home. And she said a statement that was just so beautiful. She said, "I think I had a good life while I was alive." What a beautiful transitional statement.
I'm so grateful for that. Thank you for sharing that. Was there?
Hi, I've observed people in deep grief, profound loss, at times benefiting from helping others, maybe after the loss or almost during the period. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Is it distraction? Is it meaning? Is it our need for attachment? But often I'll see that, and as part of that evolution through grief, is that they reach out and help others.
That's a really good question. I can only give you my opinion. my opinion is that I think in the proper frame of time to take that loss and actually do something productive with it. As an example, I was moved to become a volunteer, not because I had this great burning desire, it's because of my friend and the grief I felt when he died. And I wanted to at least do something to pay back, you know. But what Hospice was smart enough to do was not to let me even take the training for a year, because it was a grieving period. So, but I will say that I think, you know, that is a productive way to help. You know, I mean, I think that if we can take, you know, our brokenness, so to speak, and actually be able to also give that as a gift, because what I found is that when you are with someone who has experienced a loss, and you've also experienced a loss, maybe not the same one, there's a sense of compassion, there's a sense of understanding, and in that, healing can occur. So, I'm answering one part of the question. I'm going to turn it over to my smarter half.
Duly noted. Duly noted, my dear. Yeah, there's, you know, as we've mentioned before, people are human in great degree because we make meaning of things. And from time to time, I think it's often the case that that when we confront death, we not only ask what it means to die, but what it's meant to live. And to transform one's grief by being of service to someone else can be a profound meaning making. You know that you know, people ask all the time, well, why did my loved one, my mom, my dad, my sister, my child, why did they have to suffer and die? And everybody has to come to their own conclusions about what the meaning of that death has been. But for those of us who are grieving and for those of us who haven't died yet, we carry on in some way. We have to learn how to live in a world where such things can and do happen, that cause great pain sometimes. But if we can transform that in some way, and sometimes being in service to others, sometimes it's just organizing a golf tournament in somebody's name. If you're a child, you know, going and playing a game in honor of, you know, so and so, you know, making some meaning out of the death and honoring the person through your actions. There's also a term that I learned in hospice, I'd never heard it before, called operational grieving, and that is when people grieve by doing rather than by talking or maybe necessarily even feeling. But some people their personalities are such that that's the way that they can grieve most effectively. I can say that from personal experience because my father, who was he survived through World War II, saw a lot of combat, never talked about it. When his wife, my mom, died, he didn't really talk about it a whole lot, but what he did do was to build a concrete block wall in my basement. Now, there could be a metaphorical significance to exactly what he chose to do in his operational grieving, you know, but that's a story for my psychotherapist. But, you know, sometimes it's important to do, in addition to, or maybe even instead of, however you can find to express what this death has meant to you and what you want it to be going forward.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's somebody who has one. Yeah.
I always love it when someone quotes Thoreau, our Massachusetts buddy. And one of the lines I love about him, he says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. And in the end, he sums it up. He said he didn't want to get to the end of his life and discover that he had not lived. And I've been fortunate to, with this title of this workshop, or whatever you call it, Living with the End in Mind, it could sound kind of morbid, you know. I was telling some friends in their hotels, I'm going to this, gee. So I was like, Eileen handed me that card when I met her somewhere, and after I left and looked at it more closely, it was, geez, do I look like I'm on the way out? But we're really all on the way out. The question is, are you on the way in to the life that's here now? I belong to a very life-saving program for me that has a little saying about living one day at a time. And in the years I've been in that program, that makes more and more sense to me because I know what it feels like to die one day at a time. Inside. Outside, I like to pretend that things are great, but I'm dying. And literally participating in behavior that is shortening my life, robbing the living, because I'm numb most of the time, head in the sand. So I want to, I love I'm afraid I don't want to die, and I'm getting up there, but I want some way to enhance the living right now. You know, they say, said it's a good day to die, Dances with Wolves, it's a good day to die, but it's even better day to live. I'd still be here with you guys.
We're glad you're here too, thank you. That was lovely. Well, I want to thank our panelists and our authors. Myself. And I want to thank Church on the Hill for allowing us to use this beautiful space. It's just wonderful to be in it. And also I want to thank Community Television and our camera person, Wendy, who's just been really so helpful. So as a way of ending, there are a bunch of One Spirit graduates here. So I'd like to invite those in the audience to come forward, and we just wanted to offer you a brief blessing. So if you'd just come up and join us, if you're not too shy, that would be great.
What's a One Spirit graduate?
One Spirit Seminary is a seminary that a bunch of us went to become ministers. Yeah.
That's what I have. No, we're doing a lesson for them.
Oh.
I think that's what you want.
Yes.
I'm not a graduate myself.
God bless you too.
I just thought this would be a nice thing to do. May the blessings of God rest upon you. May God's peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart, now and forevermore. Thank you, everyone.